Greetings! In our last episode, we had a look at this Bell & Howell oscilloscope. Well, 2 episodes ago, we kind of brought it back to life. Wasn't really a whole lot wrong with it. And we found a Proto board mounted inside. That was obviously user-built. And in the last episode we poked around that board a little bit and didn't really end up with anything useful. So the next plan of attack would have been to remove that board and reverse engineer it and draw a schematic and then figure out what it does. I asked our viewership to comment and take guesses on what that board may have done, and some of you got it right. But anyway, I think I was able to figure out what it does, and we'll go through the steps of how I arrived at my conclusion. We do need some signals, and we got to make sure that the scope still works properly. So what we're going to be using today is we have a function generator over here that is currently generating a 1 kilohertz sine wave, which is shown on this scope. And what we've done is it's going into the normal BNC input on this scope. So let's first check and make sure that the scope still works. So we got a 1 kilohertz sine wave going into it. And obviously it still works. The display is a bit unstable, shifts back and forth. The camera's doing a great job masking that, but not only is it not calibrated, it needs new caps. There's a lot it needs to make it like new. But that seems to work. Let's try a few different waveforms. We can go to the triangle. It's reasonably sharp. And we go to a square wave with incredible overshoot and undershoot on this one. But it's working. Of course, compared to a modern scope, and we talked about that, it's pretty useless, but it's still a neat scope, and we still can learn a lot from it. Some of the suggestions offered were a function generator, an extended function generator, or a calibrator. I mean, the most popular ones. And the second one was turning this into a dual trace scope. It's just a single trace. So I poked around a little bit more on the board and looked at how it was connected to the front panel. And from all of that, I deduced that it must be a dual trace mod. Because why would you put a function generator inside of this? You could have gotten a function generator chip and with a couple of nickel and dime components and a Proto board, made yourself a function generator that you could use on your other circuits instead of having to build it inside here. So the dual trace, or the extra trace, made most sense. What's been added here is this is a second input. This momentary button is a one-shot, which again isn't very useful, couldn't be very useful because this is not a DSO. We have this switch. Position 1 is normal as it is now, and position 2 puts it into dual trace mode. And then we have the trigger selection, which is either automatic or manual. Now again, let me caution you, this is not a modern scope, and it takes a lot of knob twiddling to get this to show anything that makes sense. But let's give it a try. So we have nothing going into the second input, and we have that same signal going into the primary input, and here it goes. So what are we looking at here? Well, it looks like the first thing you may have noticed is how the original signal got distorted. So if you look on the scope over there, when we turn off the mod, everything is fine. When we turn the mod on, because of there must be a big impedance mismatch here, it pulls that signal down, does all sorts of weird things to it, but it's still enough for us to continue looking at this. Now, another thing you may notice is that the top is showing the original channel, and it just got a severe amplification decrease, and it also turned the incoming signal into a square wave. Now again, I can't really tell the exact frequency here, but if we count divisions, we have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half cycles. Over here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles. So it's actually showing the same frequency, but it converted it. It's probably using comparators and turned it into a square wave. But now the big question is, we have nothing coming in here. What happens if we give it an actual signal? So what we have is on the breadboard, I wired up, let's see, what do we have here? We have a 1 kilohertz signal, sine wave, going into the top trace. So let's turn this off briefly so it doesn't distort the original, and then see what that signal, the second signal, looks like that we're generating on the breadboard. And it's a sine wave at, let's see, 418 hertz. Let's make this as close as possible to half of the original waveform in frequency. And I'll have to obscure things so I can actually read what's going on. But close enough. So we have a 500 hertz signal coming off of the breadboard. What we're going to do, and this of course requires special connectors. I built a special connector here that, fits very well into the second input on the scope. Don't do this at home, boys and girls. Could be dangerous. And now we flip it back again to dual trace operation. So what do we have here? Well, we can see that it's distorting the signal just the same, the second signal we're generating. But now I'm going to have to try to adjust this, because if you look at this closely, we're looking at two square waves over here. So I'm going to have to play games here. Let's see, make it a little bit clearer. It's very hard to read the display on this, so I very much doubt the usefulness of this, or something's wrong, or I'm doing something really stupid. But okay, that's stable. So what we can tell, I can't, so basically if I go down on the time base, it's unreadable. I can't get it to sync or anything like that. Here you can kind of, if you squint, you can kind of see that it's showing the right waveforms, because the waveform on the bottom is a square wave that is about half the frequency of the one on top. Again, it's very hard to tell, but if we go here, we can see the top waveform and then the bottom waveform. And if we look at it closely, we can kind of tell that it is displaying two waveforms, where the second waveform is roughly half the frequency than the one on top. What just happened here? Oh, we lost. Oh, I know what happened. My special connector failed to make good contact. Come on. Well, here you can kind of see it. I just want to get a stable display out of it. But you can't always get what you want. Well, here you go. So that's about as stable as it gets. And when you change the time bases and everything, it becomes unintelligible. But here's proof that the Proto board, in fact, is a trace doubler. Except, of course, that everything gets converted to square wave. We are inputting sine waves, and they are all getting digitized, binaryized to 0 to 1, which is not that hard to do. There are, you basically put comparators in there, and that's what you get. I guess they could not get the true signal to show up, so this is what we end up with. Let me just say I tried and tried to get a better trace to show up. I mean, this must have been more useful than this when originally built. But this is the best I can do. The board itself may not be in perfect shape, the Proto board, but it does definitely demonstrate that with, what was it, 5 chips, you can put a second trace on your screen. So now the big question is, how is that achieved? Basically, my guess is this uses the same phenomenon that you use when you're scanning LED displays. We did a segment on LED displays, replacing plasma displays in a pinball machine with LED displays, and came to the conclusion that the digits were getting scanned, which means every digit was turned on for a fraction of a second, and then it would go to the next one and next one. And basically, if you did that fast enough, the eye would be lulled into believing that they were all on at the same time. And this uses the exact same effect, the magic of time multiplexing. What this guy does is, we have 2 inputs going to it, but keep in mind, this display has a single gun. We can't magically make a second trace appear, a truly second trace that is independent, where the 2 are independent from each other. So what's being done here is the same trick that they use with displays. And what they're doing is they're using 2 signals, and this is in chop mode. And what that means is we are showing the top display for a certain amount of time, after which we chop the time. We turn off the top display and we turn on the bottom display. And then we do the reverse on it. And if this was a scope that was properly calibrated and we went to a faster time base on it, something like this, which is unreadable but demonstrates the fact that it now looks like it is showing two separate signals. It's really not that difficult. You basically have to have a clock that switches between this input. Well, if I point at something that you can't see, it don't matter. But the switches between the original vertical input and the newly added one. And if the time base runs fast enough, it looks like it's actually showing two traces. Time base is not fast enough, you can see exactly what's happening. You can see the chop action, whereas in this case, and you go faster, but then the scope kind of doesn't like it very much. I've tried higher frequencies and the scope can't handle it. But there you have it. And even better than that, remember there were some pots on the board, and we'll have a look at it. I think I know what 3 of them do right now. So just a reminder, here's the board again. And again, yes, there are 4 ICs on it. The fifth one is a resistor array. We got some passives over here that probably set the clock time for this, for the chopping frequency. And then we have our 4 multi-turn pots over here. And now if we look at the display and turn those pots, of course I had to lay this on its side so I can show this, and kind of looks like some of the bits are falling out of it because it's on the side. This is a very, very sensitive piece of equipment. Oh, that I was changing the position, which is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to get it to be reasonably stable. Come on. Yeah, this must have been very painful to use for a real project. Okay. That's kind of okay. It's chopping right in the middle. And by the way, there's another mode which is called not used here, but it's called an alternate mode. And what it does in there, it will draw one entire waveform in channel 1. Yes, we do have 2 channels now. And then switch over to the second channel. And basically sync that to the time base you're using. So it is alternating from here to here to here to here, but for an entire scan from left to right. The chop mode is probably a little easier to implement. That's why they chose this. So let's see. We're going to the 4th pot. And when we turn that, when we turn the 4th pot, it's changing the amplification on the top trace. So going clockwise on it enlarges it, and going counterclockwise makes it smaller. But you know, the whole picture shifting up and down. But anyway, that is the first pot. The second pot, I believe, no, the first, it also changes the top trace. Did I say that wrong? Okay, let's try the second pot. Okay, the second pot enlarges trace 2, The third pot enlarges trace 1, and the fourth pot changes the distance between the two. So yes, or no, I'm not sure. I thought that's what it did. Maybe I'm turning the wrong pot. Maybe that pot doesn't work. So let's try the first pot. And the first pot truly does nothing. But the fourth pot, I could have sworn that it changed the distance between traces. So let's try this. I mean, it did something when I first twiddled it, but it's not doing it anymore. So there you have it. You now know, or have a pretty good idea, of what to do if you have a single trace scope and you want to add another trace to it. Of course, an interesting question to ask is, would this work beyond 2 traces? Yeah, well, guess how analog 4-trace, quad-trace scopes work. They just do it really fast, and they are able to sync at faster display rates, which unfortunately we cannot do. And last but not least, if we put the trigger into manual mode, it's showing something, but I don't know what that is. It's probably the first signal, and when you press this button, it chops a single time. Oh no, it toggles. It toggles between signal 1. No, it doesn't toggle. There you go. Now it's showing signal 2. And now it's showing signal 1. I don't know how well you can see that. Well, yeah, there. We're kind of stable here. There, now you can clearly see that this is the lower frequency signal that is coming in through input 2. And there's a higher frequency signal. So in manual, you can actually select. I hadn't seen this one, but you can select between signal 1 and signal 2, and then of course you go back to auto, and you get both signals. Well, there you have it. Congrats to those of you who guessed it was a trace doubler, and thanks to all of you who at least tried to guess what this thing did. Obviously what I've shown now is not horrendously useful. Again, I've tried higher frequencies and I cannot get this thing to sync properly, or I mean, obviously with the impedance mismatch and just, hey, I can come up with excuses all night long. I'd have to spend a lot of time. There may be something wrong with the Proto board. The scope itself seems to run just fine, I think, at least. So yeah, scope itself seems to work fine. I think the Proto board may have taken some liberties with how to do this, but anyway, now you can see, now you just saw how easy it is to add a second channel to your single channel scope. Please like, subscribe, share, and leave me a comment if you think I did something wrong here and maybe this is a fully useful mod, and there's something I didn't try or did improperly, and if I rectify that, then we have a true dual channel scope over here. Thanks for watching. We'll see ya. And looky here, Egbert the scope is doing a victory dance, thumbing his nose at the bell and Howell, saying, "I'm more capable than you."